Monitor HL 1736 is heading towards a power systems failure thanks to a bit of heretic sabotage. So you're going to restore the coolant and hopefully save the day. Get in, access the operations array, and use the cryonic rods to flush the system. Preferably before something explodes. Head on through the ventilation tunnels and look for an access point.
This way! Move it!
Set your data interrogators. If all goes well, we can unlock the system, prime the rods, and send them where they're needed.
Target here! Engage it!
That's the first part done. Get to the base of the Matrix bar and put those cryonic rods to work. What are you waiting for? Get it in place! Now! You finished here? Look for a way out!
Today we are taking a look at Darktide gameplay, and while it still isn't the uncut 15-minute walkthrough with HUD up and all the bells and whistles many of us are hoping to see soon, it still gives us a really good idea of what to expect going in, how combat will function, which mechanics are fresh and new, and which ones are being ported over from Vermintide. It's short, it's to the point, it is action-packed all the way through, and it's the kind of reveal that's going to attract a lot more eyes to this title. You don't even have to be invested in Warhammer or 40k to know that games like this do not come around very often. What we saw here was satisfying, visceral, and gory as hell. It just looks fun. So let's jump in. Just a few technical aspects to get out of the way early. Fatshark is partnering with Nvidia for this title, and it will launch with full DLSS, ray tracing, and reflex technologies, which will hopefully allow players to maximize performance and reduce latency while still maintaining or improving visuals on those higher graphics settings. Players who do not own a GeForce RTX PC or laptop will still be able to play with all those same performance boosts by streaming it from the cloud with Nvidia GeForce Now. No idea how all that will translate to performance in functionality, but throughout the trailer, there are quite a few visual aspects from the lighting, shadows, texture quality, and gore that seem noticeably improved from Vermintide 2. But of course, that is to be expected, considering that title released more than 4 years ago, and graphics technologies have improved quite a bit during that span. There are some noticeable FPS drops when the Poxwalker hordes start kicking up a frenzy, so if it's anything like Vermintide, expect this to be a relatively demanding game, and there will probably be a bit of chugging when there are, 5 specials, a massive horde, people are popping off bombs and ults, and the particle effects for everybody start blasting all over your screen. So as the gameplay gets underway, we're deep in the bowels of the hive, and the cultists have sabotaged a factory in charge of cooling the lower levels, either to make its systems go critical and physically cause a massive explosion, or simply to overheat the area and drive people out into the open where they'll be easy prey for Poxwalkers, and creating a warm breeding ground for Nurgle's infectious diseases in the process. We have to restore the cryonic rods and cool the system down to prevent whatever calamitous event is waiting for us on the other end should we fail. Now, a really cool detail you might have missed is that this is almost certainly one of the early missions, because there are some subtle but interesting model changes to the main enemy type we'll face. The guys on screen right now are acting and swarming exactly like Poxwalkers do, but have clearly not progressed deep into their corruption yet, as they're still mostly human, lacking the horns, decayed skin, and zombie-like features of an utterly converted Poxwalker. So presumably, the disease hasn't fully taken root yet, and as we move further into the game, and indeed further into this level, the infection will worsen, with enemies becoming even more corrupt and nasty looking. I think that's a really nice detail there. But let's talk weapons and special attacks, because your arsenal is the only thing keeping you alive down there, and there's some new ways to get the most out of your chosen kit. Every weapon in the game now has a unique modifier that changes how you use it. We touched on that a little bit in the magazine article from a few weeks back, but in this case, we're seeing it in action for the first time, and there are some wild properties you can manage yourself. So in the case of a plasma pistol, which was not shown in this gameplay, players can overcharge and fire a superheated ball that explodes like a grenade, but it'll put you out of commission for a few seconds while the weapon cools down. The first thing we see in this gameplay is the Ogryn absolutely shellacking a horde with his Ripper gun, tearing it apart with its alternate fire mode. These automatic combat shotguns, also known as Ripper guns, are typically hardwired with a burst limiter to prevent the simple mind of an Ogryn from mag dumping every time he pulls the trigger. Basically, they have so much fun going full auto that they end up wasting all their ammo, they're left without a ranged weapon, and then they're kind of useless. So usually they have that burst limiter to prevent them from doing something like that, but you can see him kick into a special animation here, grab the foregrip, and immediately start going to town, giving it a big jump in fire rate and horde killing potential, probably at the cost of accuracy and control. He essentially becomes a mobile weapons platform, but he loses a lot of his mobility when he goes into that alternate fire mode. You can see he's barely able to move. He's probably able to fire this gun in semi-auto, walking around normally, but when you take out that foregrip and fully go to town, you're going to kind of be rooted in place like Bastion from Overwatch. Directly afterwards, we see some super satisfying decapitations, and then that iconic chainsword begin its devilish work, and this thing looks nasty. So what he does here is he hits that special modifier button to begin revving the chain. An enemy attack comes in and he blocks it, but because the sword has already been revved up and charged, it's ready to go. So right after that stun, he goes on the offensive and the blade hits, it bites deep, deals huge single target damage, and ultimately ends up cutting the dude in half. Exactly the type of attack you'll want to use against high HP armored enemies. This Corrupted Guardsman is wearing armor. You can see it spark when those teeth start biting in, but it doesn't do him much good. Those diamond hard edges carve their way through and bisect him without too much effort. Similar thing right here. We get a look at the special attack for the Thunder Hammer, which takes a moment to charge up its energy, then obliterates an armored storm vermin equivalent from behind, breaking some ribs and sending the dude flying with some big time impact. Same attack earlier in the trailer, straight up cuts an Ogryn bulwark in half, which, okay, hammers typically aren't going to bisect something, especially not something that meaty, that chunky, but I must say, watching that back, pretty goddamn satisfying. And immediately, we are seeing a ton of emphasis on melee still. Tons of impact and momentum transferred to opponents when a weapon hits, and lots of gore. Already clear, this will be a more visceral experience than even Vermintide was, and that was a game that does not shy away from dismemberment or blood at all. I'd say it's a suitable amount for a game set in the 40k universe. I mean, maybe the coolest part of the trailer is the Psyker head pop, which is just absolutely insane. The Psyker puts warp energy inside an armored Ogryn's body and psychokinetically Sub-Zero spine rips him straight up, popping his dome like a champagne cork. It's freaking wild. And that was probably the thing that made me pop off more than anything else in this trailer. That was awesome to watch. If you get to do that a lot as Psyker, probably gonna be my go-to class. Like, that's just way too cool. But yeah, talking about the Psyker specifically, there are a couple other cool clips here that give us a great understanding of what he's all about and how he'll play. The first new feature for Psyker is his block mechanic, which puts out a small force field blocking melee weapons from the front, and may also be able to block limited amounts of ranged fire as well. Not sure about that. Then he transfers into a super slick overhead that strikes off the head of an armored mauler. He can also take that same block mechanic and kind of force push enemies away, although it ends up looking more like a generic shove with a little bit more flair rather than its own unique mechanic, which I'd really like to see the ability to straight up yeet a handful of enemies with force powers, maybe send them flying like 10-15 feet to give you a lot of space, maybe on a cooldown, rather than just knock them over at your feet like most of the shoves do in Vermintide. Although I will say the Ogryn shove does seem like it has a little bit more punch to it than it does for your typical Vermintide or Darktide character, which is probably how it should go, right? He's 3 times, 4 times, 5 times the size of a regular human. When he pushes something, it should go flying. But it's easy to tell. A lot of these animations, abilities, and ideas are at the very least being informed by Vermintide, if not outright carried over. Like this Psyker staff right here, which is very similar in form and function to the Conflagration staff from Vermintide 2. Charge it up, big area of effect on the ground appears, Release it and enemies explode, and the more you cast, the more heat or perils of the warp you will generate. Although I will say this time around, it looks and sounds a lot more impactful. Cultists look like they just got hit by a goddamn cruise missile. Chunks of meat crayon by the time they hit the ground. Like, that's just absolutely brutal. Same can be said for the ultimate abilities or career skills as they were known in previous titles. A lot of them do look like they were ported straight over from Vermintide. At least for this specific class of Psyker, and remember there might still be multiple classes, there might be similar talent trees to what we had in Vermintide. None of that has been confirmed yet, so there may be more ults, but this one looks exactly like Unchained. A big purging explosion around him that knocks everybody backwards and gives him space, which means it's probably also one of the ways in which he flushes overheat or perils of the warp. Basically, press F when your psychic power overcharge is about to kill you, and it will reset that meter back to 0 and allow you to begin casting anew. The Ogryn charge appears to be almost a one-to-one recreation of Foot Knight's career skill, allowing him to sprint his way through a horde, bowling over everything in his path, and it also stunlocks a bulwark, momentarily dropping his guard and shield, and allowing Zealot to drop in from behind with a Thunderhammer RKO. In this first battle clip, while Ogryn's unleashing with his Ripper Gun, you can see Zealot do Zealot things using Victor Saltzpyre's dash to close the gap on specials and groups of ranged enemies. And finally, we see the Veteran's ultimate ability as well, though this one seems new from the ground up. Veteran shouts a voice line, the edges of his screen turn yellow, and he kind of zooms in a bit more, like heightened focus sort of thing, leading to maybe more accurate shots, faster fire rate, less recoil, more range damage. Hard to know exactly what it does based on such a short clip, but needless to say, Veteran is our Twin Link flashlight class, so whatever it does, it will almost certainly make him more effective when engaging enemies from range with his lasgun. Which of course leads into the idea that ranged combat will be a bigger factor in Darktide than it was in Vermintide, at least during the mid and late stages of Vermintide's lifecycle. Because ranged weapons in general seem beefier here, they're more powerful, and they are more omnipresent, despite all the melee shenanigans still happening, and perhaps being more than some 40k fanboys would have expected going in. That's not a knock on you guys, by the way. I know that ranged combat should be a bigger factor here. I think it will be, but melee is still going to be a large focus, as well it should when you've got chain swords and Psyker swords and powerful staffs and all that kind of stuff. And as we know, with the way the character system works now, if you want to run for guardsmen, you can. So, if you're more focused on the ranged gameplay and you prefer that style, you can absolutely grab up 4 buddies or 4 randoms and play that exact same way if you want to do Guardsman Simulator. Now, sprinting is also confirmed for the first time, which is a huge departure from previous titles, and I already know some people are not going to like that, but frankly, I'm not surprised by it at all. More ranged enemies means being able to move from cover to cover quickly is going to be much more important in this game, and to prevent that annoyance of waddling slowly towards groups of lasgun-wielding corrupted guardsmen, Fat Shark are giving us more tools to get in close and tie them up in melee, which I think is logical. It will probably be limited by some factor one way or the other, whether that be through stamina or simply a max duration you can sprint before it goes back on cooldown, but I seriously doubt you'll permanently be able to run around the map like your last name is Zapparini. This is not Call of Duty, this is not Battlefield. The maps are not going to be so big that you're going to need to sprint everywhere you go. Cool little detail, unlike in Vermintide where you had kind of an immersion-breaking green outline of friendly players to help you see through hordes or walls, just so you didn't get lost in the scrum, there's a much more interesting in-universe effect here that helps you pick out teammates. Now you can see their biosigns, their nervous system, and skeletal structure through objects, glowing blue normally, but presumably turning red or orange when taking damage or about to die, which is a really cool touch. There's now a hacking minigame as well that will take your full undivided attention while teammates try and watch your back, like the stuff we see in Deep Rock Galactic. Or like in Vermintide 1, you pick up barrels, you try to move them to a different location, you are kind of indisposed while you're doing that. Here it's going to be a little bit more in-depth because you've got to hack it correctly or presumably it will reset. Overall, the environmental design and creepy vibes are spot on throughout this gameplay. There's tons of model and enemy variety, and I gotta say it, this art team is elite. They have done a fantastic job of bringing 40k to life here. As for all the elements being ported over from Vermintide, I don't yet know how I feel about all that. It does seem like a lot of melee animations, career skills, and weapons are using content from the Uberstrike 5 and their adventures, and I'm kind of torn on that front because I love that series, but Darktide needs to have its own identity. And when I'm seeing falchion attack patterns and Chaos Mauler overheads from Vermintide, with so many ultimates also being carried over 1-to-1, that is a lot of content being ported. And I think it's fair to wonder if that will be a negative mark for Darktide, if so many things feel so similar, even though Warhammer Fantasy and 40k are entirely separate universes. But at the same time, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? Take the parts that make sense to carry over to 40k, just improve upon them in terms of visual and auditory impact, make them meatier, crunchier, and more fun, and then add a ton of new content on top of that, and I think a lot of people will be happy on that front. So maybe a mixed bag there, but overall, loving how meaty and visceral all the combat is, how impactful everything is, and how much fun the combat actually looks. There were 4 or 5 moments watching this trailer for the first time where I got genuinely excited. The Psyker head pop, the Poxwalker swarms getting taken to Pound Town, the hordes getting sent flying every time the Ogryn or the Thunderhammer makes impact. Besides the obvious performance hits that showed up a few times, and that was usually during the Poxwalker hordes themselves, I think this trailer hit all the right notes, and this is pretty much exactly what I want to see from Darktide. I'm just hoping for some good weapon variety, because so far, we've only seen maybe 1 or 2 per each class. I'd like to have 4 or 5 ranged weapons for Guardsmen, 4 or 5 melee weapons for Ogryn, that kind of thing, and then maybe a couple more undisclosed bosses on launch day too. Because so far, we've only seen the Plague Ogryn, which we do see again at the end of the trailer, super grody, disgusting model, and we've only seen that relatively small arsenal of weapons, so I would like to have more content on launch day than what we've seen so far. Hopefully they're just holding back on some of that to keep the hype flowing. Basically, I just hope there's a lot more on that front still to be unveiled, because there are so many cool weapons in 40k that deserve to see play here. Moving forward, I hope we get some completely uncut gameplay with the HUD up and a voiceover from the devs explaining all the nuances and features. If not during this month, certainly well before launch. I think that will be really important. This gameplay was great. It was illuminating in many ways, but I do want to see uncut gameplay that's going to be like how a player would actually play it. But overall, for now, hope you guys enjoyed the video and the new gameplay, and I'll see you all in the next one. Andy Pride, signing out for now. Have a good one, guys.